All right, you may proceed. Whereupon, a portion of a videotape, People's Exhibit Number 2, was played for the court and jury to its conclusion. Do you anticipate needing the screen again for a while?
No, sir. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Bashir, my name is Thomas Mesereau, and I speak for Mr. Jackson.
Thank you.
At some point in time, you made an effort to contact Mr. Jackson about doing this show, correct?
That is correct.
And approximately when was that?
I think it was around April 2002.
And you contacted someone named Uri Geller, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. I think Mr. Mesereau is now straying directly into the areas covered by the California Shield Law and the First Amendment, and we would ask the court to rule that that kind of inquiry is off limits.
Before we rule on that objection, I think we need to discuss the scope of the examination here. As I see it, the prosecution put him on simply to authenticate the tape. I suspect you would like to examine him at length, based on your opening statement, about a lot of things.
Yes, Your Honor, but he does give special thanks to Mr. Uri Geller at the end of the tape. And the prosecution played that tape, and I think they've opened the door on that one.
It's not even in for the truth of the matter stated, Your Honor.
I think do you have him under subpoena?
No.
What I think I should do is to limit your examination of him at this time as to the foundation of the tape. So that's what I'm going to do.
Mr. Bashir, in order to produce the show we've just watched, you had to speak to Mr. Jackson, true?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, this is unpublished information. It's clear from the face of the tape that Mr. Bashir talked to Mr. Jackson, and that's published material and that's the limits of the proper examination.
I'll overrule the objection for the same reason I stated earlier. Would you be more comfortable to be at counsel table where you have a microphone?
That might be helpful, Your Honor. It might be better for the jury, and they won't have to see me jumping up and down. I'm a little uncomfortable taking one side or the other.
Well, I think you need to take a chair. We won't assume you're taking anyone's side.
Okay, thank you. And, Your Honor, may I just inquire on the procedure that the court is following? Because the approach the court took, the initial objection was to ask Mr. Bashir to decide whether to answer. And I'm reluctant to have him make that decision without knowing that I'm going to be able to argue against a potential contempt finding based on the Shield Law. So if the court could clarify the procedures that it's following, that would be very helpful.
Well, the procedure I was following was to let you make your objection. Then I'll ask the witness if he wishes to answer the question, and we will go from there.
Will I have an opportunity, if the witness declines to answer based on the constitutional Shield Law protecting journalists, to then argue that the material's protected and the court should not hold Mr. Bashir in contempt?
Of course.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the prosecution did go into Mr. Bashir's qualifications. May I cross-examine in that area?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, Mr. Bashir, I did ask you a question, and that question I'll repeat. In order to produce what the jury has just seen, you had to make contact with Mr. Jackson, correct?
Correct.
And you made numerous attempts to contact Mr. Jackson, true?
Again, Your Honor, I object on the grounds that that's unpublished information, and it's also unclear from the face of the tapes that he had contact with Mr. Jackson.
Your Honor, I have correspondence from Mr. Bashir. It's pretty obvious that, in a non-privileged context, he was trying to make contact and say what he wanted to do.
The objection is overruled. Do you wish to answer that question, Mr. Bashir?
I'm going to leave it to Mr. Bashir. It puts him in a difficult position. Because there's a very important legal principle that's taken. It does not matter whether Mr. Mesereau claims to have correspondence or that there's other documents. That's the limits of the permissible.
I think I understand the legal parameters.
Information. I just want to make sure I preserve the record and that the
You are doing an excellent job.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, my preface is to simply stand by the film as you've seen it and to testify as to its contents.
All right.
All object, Your Honor, and move to strike his comments. They were not in response to any question.
Well, actually they were a response to my question if he wanted to answer the question.
Sorry, sir. That.
So I won't let you strike that. All right, he is following his counsel's advice and he's not answering that question. Next question.
Your Honor, I would move for sanctions against the witness. Or I would move to strike all of his testimony, including the prosecution's playing of this tape, if he refuses to be cross-examined.
The way I would like to proceed with this is that he does have some protection under the shield law that his counsel has been pointing out. That protection is against contempt of court. What I think I'll do is let you ask him the questions. Let his attorney make the objections. Let him decide whether he's going to answer. And then I'll make a record. We have a record of those questions, and then I'll review them later to determine whether or not I feel a contempt charge should be issued. It's really a ticklish area of the law.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bashir, you outlined some qualifications you have in the world of journalism, correct?
I didn't outline any qualifications, sir. I just referred to the chronology of my career.
Did you mean, when you did that, to explain that you're a qualified professional journalist?
I meant simply to explain my career chronologically, sir.
Do you consider yourself as a professional journalist?
I do, sir.
Do you consider yourself a professional journalist because you've had certain experience in journalism?
I do, sir.
Do you consider yourself to be a professional journalist because you're educated in the world of journalism?
My academic studies were not in journalism. They were in the arts and humanities. So I don't have a formal qualification, if that's what you're asking, sir, but I have the experience that comes with working in the profession.
Now, as a journalist in England, you are regulated by a certain administrative agency, correct?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Is there an organization or an administrative agency that goes by a title somewhat like British Broadcasting Standards Board?
There is an organization called the Broadcasting Complaints Commission. Would you be referring to that?
I think I am. Do you work with that organization in any capacity?
That organization doesn't employ journalists.
Have you been sanctioned by that organization?
Could you repeat the question?
Have you been sanctioned by that organization?
By the Broadcasting Complaints Commission.
Yes.
The answer to that question is, 3 complaints were made against me. 2 of the key complaints were entirely rejected, and they were to do with balance and fairness. 1 of the 3 was upheld. This is, sir, just so I can explain so people understand, because they.
Certainly.
Because they may not understand. The Broadcasting Standards Commission is not a legal body, and it has no particular merit in a legal setting.
Nevertheless, a complaint against you as a journalist was upheld, true.
As I said, sir, 3 complaints were made. The 2 key complaints were entirely rejected. 1 complaint was upheld of the 3.
Let's talk about the one that was upheld, sir. There was a complaint against you that was upheld by that agency, correct?
There was, sir, yes.
And what did they complain about, Mr. Bashir?
The complaint related to how I described what I was doing with the story that I was working on.
And what were you doing, Mr. Bashir?
I was doing journalism.
Could you put a little teeth on that and just tell the jury what we're talking about?
In relation to.
You don't know what we're talking about.
Do you mean the specific program? Sorry, I don't know whether. Sorry, I apologize. Are you asking me about the complaint, or are you asking me about the story, the reporting that I was doing?
Why don't you tell the jury about both?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Mr. Mesereau is now inquiring about unpublished information or unbroadcast information about another matter. Same objection.
Well, it's a compound question. Sustained.
Okay. Please describe for the jury the subject matter of the complaint you just identified, Mr. Bashir.
The story was about a teenage prodigy, a mathematics genius, who had run away from university, had legally emancipated herself from her family. And the story was to describe what had happened from both sides.
You were accused of misrepresentations, true?
No, that's incorrect.
You were not accused of misrepresenting anything in that complaint.
I was accused of unfairness, which was entirely rejected. I was accused of breaching an agreement, which was entirely rejected. I was accused of not representing the entirety of what I was doing with that broadcast to one of the individuals.
Kind of what you've been accused of here, right?
Objection. Argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Mr. Bashir, how long was the film you did on Mr. Jackson?
The total duration.
Yes, please.
I'm afraid I don't know in exact terms. It's some time, it's over 2 years since the film was broadcast. I think it was around an hour and 15 minutes.
And how many hours of footage did you obtain during the time you spent with Mr. Jackson?
Objection, Your Honor. Unpublished information, covered by the Shield Law and the First Amendment.
The objection is overruled. Do you wish to answer?
No, I don't.
Next question.
You don't know at all. Can't even estimate.
He doesn't.
That's not what I wish to answer.
He chose not to answer.
Your Honor, I would move that the entire testimony be stricken and the prosecution's evidence be stricken.
That's denied.
I would ask for contempt, Your Honor.
The procedure that I'm going to follow I already outlined.
Okay. For the record, Your Honor, could I have a running objection if he refuses to answer a question, or shall I make my request each time?
No, you don't need to do that. Let me just understand what we're having a running record about.
Yes.
If his attorney objects, and he declines to answer based on his attorney's advice, I will review that question for contempt proceedings without further necessity on your part to request that. Your motion to strike his entire testimony and evidence is denied.
Okay, Your Honor, could I have that be a running objection as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bashir, you communicated with Mr. Jackson's assistant by letter before you began filming this show, correct?
Again, Your Honor, I object. It's unpublished information created and prepared in the course of news gathering and covered by the Shield Law and the First Amendment.
Do you wish to answer?
No.
Same objection, Your Honor.
And I'll review the record.
Mr. Bashir, you wrote to Mr. Jackson's assistant and said you would very much like to feature Michael with a large group of children, around 50, welcoming them and sharing with them his extraordinary home so that, for one day, their lives can be enriched, correct?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Do you wish to?
Your Honor, excuse me. Could I add an objection to that also? Beyond the scope of direct examination.
Sustained as to beyond the scope of the direct examination.
Mr. Bashir, you interviewed Mr. Jackson and repeatedly asked him questions about his desire for an international children's holiday, correct?
Same objection, Your Honor, and that would seem to be beyond the scope of the direct examination as well.
Sustained as to beyond the scope.
Your Honor, will the court permit me to ask questions about what's actually on the tape?
No, because the tape's being introduced not for the truth of the matter asserted, but for a different purpose. There are some areas, however, that I didn't instruct the jury on about the assertions that they wish to have considered for the truth of the matter. And those would not be out of bounds, because, well, let me ask the district attorney. You do not intend to offer any other evidence of those statements that were the subject of the motion to have the court consider the statements for the truth of the matter?
No, I think we outlined in our motion, and the court made its ruling last week. Is that what you're referring to, Your Honor?
Well, I'm asking you. This is the only evidence you're going to have of those statements, so.
Yes, sir.
Then those statements open cross-examination as to those statements. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think I do, Your Honor. The statements you had us isolate for purposes of constituting admissions.
Yes.
Is what you're talking about.
That's correct.
May I take a second just to obtain those?
Yes.
Thank you. While we're getting those, Your Honor, if I may, I'll just continue.
Sure.
Mr. Bashir, you had Michael Jackson sign an agreement without a lawyer present, true?
Again, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the direct and covered by the Shield Law.
I'd overrule that objection. Will you answer that question?
Mr. Jackson signed 2 agreements in which he asked for no conditions whatsoever and agreed that I was free to make the film with him. And the first of those agreements was signed in November 2002, and the second agreement was signed in January 2003, just about 2 weeks prior to broadcast of the British version of the film that you've just seen.
Your Honor, I would move to strike the answer and request that the court order the witness to answer the question.
All right, it's stricken, and I'll ask the court reporter to read back the question so that you understand the question. Record read.
I renew my objection, Your Honor. That goes to newsgathering and relates to information prepared in connection with newsgathering.
The objection is overruled. Do you wish to answer that?
I think I agree with my attorney that I have protections under the Shield Law, Your Honor.
All right.
Same objection would be noted, Your Honor. I'm sorry, Your Honor, it's hard for Mr. Jackson and for us to hear the witness.
I apologize. It's my fault. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Speak up.
And, yes, you don't need to. I'm going to review all of the questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bashir.
If you want to, you can.
Okay. Mr. Bashir, you have been accused in England of forging signatures, correct?
Incorrect.
No one has ever made that accusation, sir.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Hearsay. Lack of foundation. Beyond the scope of direct examination.
Sustained on beyond the scope of direct.
Mr. Bashir, to qualify as a professional journalist, do you have to fulfill any particular educational program?
In the United States or in the United Kingdom, sir?
Anywhere.
I'm frankly unsure about how that applies in the United States. And in the United Kingdom, there would be different ways of progressing your career. Some people would do it through the route of experience. And others would do it through some kind of academic qualification. I think others will have a mix of the two.
How did you do it?
A mix of the two.
Could you please explain that?
I was given training during my employment at the BBC. And I also took opportunities to work in print and radio journalism, so I combined the experience part with the training.
You are currently a paid legal analyst for ABC, correct?
Incorrect, sir.
Are you a paid employee by ABC in any capacity?
I am, sir.
Could you please tell the jury what that is?
I'm employed as a correspondent for ABC News, which is owned by Disney.
How long have you been paid as a correspondent for ABC?
My contract began on the 1st of September last year.
Are you covering this case as a correspondent who is paid?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope. And again, requiring him to cover news-gathering activities as covered by the Shield Law.
Overruled. Do you wish to answer that question?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Same objection. Thank you.
Noted.
Mr. Bashir, if you look at the two documents you referred to that you say Mr. Jackson signed, his signature appears to be different from document to document, correct?
Same objection, Your Honor. And, same objection on the Shield Law, Your Honor, and beyond the scope of direct.
Sustained. Beyond the scope.
Mr. Bashir, did you request that Michael Jackson bring Macaulay Culkin so you could film him at Neverland?
Same objection under the Shield Law and the First Amendment, Your Honor. And beyond the scope of direct.
Sustained on beyond the scope.
In the process of putting this film together, Mr. Bashir, did you write to Michael Jackson's assistant and say you wanted to film the beautiful landscape encouraging all of us to become as little children again?
I'm going to object as beyond the scope.
You must let him finish his question before you interrupt. Don't interrupt is what I'm saying.
Could I just object though? The scope of the direct is very clear. Mr. Mesereau knows what the scope of direct is. And now he's just knowingly asking questions that are beyond the scope of direct. And I would ask the court to ask him to refrain from doing that. That would truncate the examination.
I would like to be able to hear the question he's asking so that I can make a reasoned ruling on his question.
Mr. Bashir.
You had not finished the last question. Would you read back his answer as far as you got it? His question. Record read. Is that the complete question?
Yes.
And the objection?
Same objection. Beyond the scope of direct. Shield Law. First Amendment.
Mr. Bashir, did you, In the process of making contact with Mr. Jackson so you could make this film, misrepresent that you were putting together a trip to Africa for Mr. Jackson to visit sick children.
Same objection, Your Honor. Beyond the scope of direct, shield law, First Amendment.
All sustain the objection. Beyond the scope of direct.
Mr. Bashir, did you allow Mr. Jackson any editorial control over this film?
Same objections, Your Honor.
The objection beyond the scope is sustained.
Mr. Bashir, before this film was shown, and I'm talking about the actual film itself, not generally speaking. I'm talking about what the prosecution has used in this courtroom today, alright. Did you watch that actual reel?
Same objections. Beyond the scope, shield law, First Amendment.
I think we're discussing authentication, Your Honor.
The objection is overruled. Do you want the question read back?
Yes, please, Your Honor. Record read. I don't wish to answer the question. The question is protected under the shield law.
Your Honor, I would.
Maybe you didn't understand the question. I hope I did. The question is, did you watch this reel right here, just before we showed it?
Today.
Today.
Oh, I'm happy to answer that question, Your Honor.
Is that your question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
No, I did not.
Move to strike the prosecutor's evidence and testimony as being unauthenticated.
I'll take that under advisement. I'll have to go back and look at it.
Before you testified today, did you discuss your testimony with Prosecutor Snedden?
I did not.
Before you testified today, did you discuss your testimony with anyone?
I had private discussions with my attorney.
Other than your attorney, before you testified today, did you discuss what you were going to say with anybody?
No.
No one with your company?
No.
Never mentioned it to any other journalists, Mr. Bashir?
Today.
Yes, sir.
I haven't been with any other journalists, sir.
How about yesterday?
I wasn't with any journalists yesterday, sir.
Have you discussed with any other journalist at any time what you were going to say in this courtroom in this case, Mr. Bashir?
Your Honor, what's the materiality of this question? That has nothing to do with the direct examination.
Overruled. You may answer.
I've discussed this case with my attorney.
To your knowledge, when did you receive a subpoena in this case, Mr. Bashir?
At the beginning of this year.
Are you telling this jury, under oath, that since you received a subpoena, or since you knew you received a subpoena, till today, you've never discussed what you were going to say with anyone other than your attorney?
I'm trying very hard to remember so that I can be accurate, sir.
You can take your time.
Thank you. As far as my recollection goes, I recall discussing the matter with my attorney.
Let me state the question again, because you may not have understood it. You learned you had received a subpoena when?
At the beginning of this year.
Since you learned you had received a subpoena, have you ever discussed the fact that you were going to be a witness with anyone other than your attorney?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. That's a different question than discussing what he was going to say. I'm not sure how he could discuss what he was going to say before the trial.
Objection. Your Honor. These are speaking objections. This is improper form.
The objection's overruled.
You're free to answer.
And I can have it read back for you.
That's okay, Your Honor. Thank you. I'm happy to state that I discussed the matter with my attorney.
You may be happy to say that, sir, but would you please answer the question?
Your Honor, that's argumentative.
Sustained. Read the question back to him, please. Record read.
I discussed the matter with my attorney, sir.
Your Honor, could I ask that the witness be ordered to respond to the question?
You haven't quite answered it.
I understand, Your Honor. The difficulty is I want to be completely accurate in my answers, unequivocal and clear. And what I know for certain is that I have discussed the matter with my attorney.
And no one else.
I'm pretty sure that's the case, but I can't be as unequivocal as I'd like to be, and that's why I'm hesitant.
Okay. Next question.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bashir, and I might be. You do not have a clear recollection of telling any other journalist, since you learned you had a subpoena, that you're going to be a witness in this case, right?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that question. That was not the question that was asked.
It's another question.
Then the framing of the question is improper.
It's not improper, Your Honor.
The objection is overruled. I'm going to have the question read back. Whenever there's an argument like that,
Thank you.
we lose the question. Record read.
The fact of my subpoena, sir, was published in various forms of media, so that everybody knew that I had been subpoenaed as a result of that. It is possible that during my work for ABC, I may have mentioned that I had been subpoenaed. If you are suggesting that I had a detailed discussion about what I was going to say, that is completely untrue. But it is possible, as I say, I wish to be as clear as I can, but it is possible that I mentioned the fact of my subpoena to my colleagues.
But as you sit here today, you just don't remember ever mentioning it to any particular colleague, true?
That's not what I said.
What are you saying?
Asked and answered, and argumentative.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'll restate it, Your Honor, if it will make it easier. Mr. Bashir, are you telling this jury, under oath, that you don't have a clear recollection of ever telling any journalist that you were going to be a witness in this case?
Sir, what I said was, that news of the subpoena was published broadly and wide internationally. And as I returned to my core task at ABC News, I may have mentioned the fact that I had received a subpoena.
Are you telling this jury that you don't have a clear recollection of ever telling any particular journalist that you were going to be a witness in this case? Yes or no, Mr. Bashir?
Sir.
I'm going to object to that. It's argumentative.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Only because you said, are you telling this jury, as opposed to just asking a question.
I'll rephrase it.
Everybody is telling this jury everything. They're sitting right there.
Mr. Bashir, do you recall telling any particular journalist that you were going to be a witness in this case?
As I've said, news of my subpoena was published. And I'm quite sure that it's possible that I may have mentioned the fact that I had received a subpoena in relation to these proceedings. What your earlier question, which slightly confused me, was that you were suggesting that I may have had a discussion with individuals about the content of what I would say.
Mr. Bashir, please tell us if you don't understand the question. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you recall ever telling any journalist that you were going to be a witness in this case? Yes or no?
I've answered the question.
May I ask that the witness be instructed to answer the question, Your Honor?
You have not answered the question. Would you answer the question?
My answer to the question, Your Honor, is that I cannot specifically recollect a time, a day, and an individual with whom I had a detailed discussion about the subject of my subpoena. What I am saying is it is perfectly possible that it was mentioned to me, or by me, as I returned to work.
Mr. Bashir, I'm not asking you about day or time. I'm just asking you if at any time you told any journalist that you're going to be a witness in the case.
It's possible.
Are you saying under oath you don't recall any specific individual that you spoke to about that?
That's what I'm saying, sir.
And you don't recall any specific journalist you ever told, I'm going to be a witness in the Michael Jackson case?
I just can't be specific, I'm afraid, sir.
Is your office in New York with ABC?
It is, sir.
Are there other offices near your office at ABC?
There are, sir.
Are there journalists who occupy those offices at ABC, Mr. Bashir?
There are, sir.
Do you tend to chat with those journalists from time to time, sir?
I have a private office. And I tend to spend a large amount of time out on the road. So opportunities to talk like that are not very frequent.
Whose office is next to yours at ABC?
Your Honor, I'm going to object on relevance grounds and beyond the scope of direct, and asked and answered, and many things.
The problem is, counsel, that he said that he only spoke to his attorney about this, and he has a privilege which we all understand. The reason I have not sustained objections is, counsel has been exploring whether or not he spoke to anyone else about that besides his attorney. But guess what? It's time for a break.
Thank you, Your Honor.